The recording has now begun. We're all good to go. Awesome, thank you.
All right, if the judges and our opponents are ready, I can start. So proud to stand on side government today on the motion, the United States federal government should substantially increase investment in hydropower. To begin with some framing points, firstly on definitions, we define significantly as to a great or significant extent. We define investment as the action of putting money, effort, and time into a project, and hydroelectric power uses the natural flow of moving water to generate electricity. Secondly, this is a policy resolution, thus we propose weighing this debate on a cost-benefit analysis framework. Onto our plan. The United States federal government should substantially increase investment in hydroelectric power by retrofitting built dams with hydropower capabilities. There are over 80,000 dams in the United States, and 97% do not produce electricity. There are only 2,500 dams that are actually retrofitted with hydropower. Of those 80,000, 54,000 can be retrofitted at a megawatt or more, according to the Oak Ridge National Library. We would also point to how hydroelectric power is affordable to build because it provides low-cost electricity and durability over time when we compare it to other sources of energy. Additionally, costs to construct are relatively low, given that we're using pre-existing infrastructure. Our actor and agent of enforcement is the USFG, and funding is through normal ways and means. Our time frame is going to be as soon as possible. On to our first continue.
Can you stop the time? Yeah, so just how much funding exactly is this? How much is significant?
Sure, so we don't have an exact set amount of money. We would just say if we're retrofitting those like existing dams with hydropower, that's going to be the significant amount of money that we're investing. Contention one is combating climate change. Investing into hydroelectric power plays a crucial role in our fight against climate change, especially as we move towards a renewable future. There are 3 reasons why hydroelectric power are uniquely suited for such a role. Firstly, hydroelectric power is renewable and clean. We would point you to how hydropower is a renewable source of energy because it relies on the water cycle, making it renewable. Furthermore, this makes it a clean source of energy as well. Not only this, dams themselves promote healthy water flow, thus they are self-replenishing and sustaining, given that the water flow is what produces the energy in the first place. Secondly, the storage of hydroelectric power complements other energy sources. Hydropower complements other renewable energy sources because its energy is often stored to use along with other renewables, such as wind and solar power. Thirdly, hydroelectric power is incredibly flexible. It can go from producing no energy to maximum outputs of energy. That means that if there were to be an outage or a disruption, they immediately take care of that. This flexibility is unmatched by wind and solar. Studies suggest that the flexibility of hydropower could actually fill the gaps left by current renewable energy structures. What are the impacts here? The effects of climate change, displacement, poverty, increasing temperatures, disease, so on and so forth, are increasingly worse. Because hydroelectric power is renewable and does not emit greenhouse gases, is flexible and supplements other sources of renewable energy, this shift to renewable sources of energy combats, or at the very least, mitigates the harmful effects of climate change, which we have until 2050 to address before the impacts become irreversible. So since emissions anywhere affect people everywhere, this has global scope and massive irreversibility impacts. Onto our contention 2, which is the United States energy independence. Firstly, domestic production we are not reliant on international fuel sources. The United States receives about 10% of its energy imports from Russia and a significant portion from Great Britain. That poses a great risk given the volatile situation in Europe as of lately. The United States must rely on its own energy in the future to avoid the effects of war in other continents, or at the very least, just instability in general. Even relying on energy from other countries like Mexico and Canada presents a vulnerability to the United States power grid. Energy independency is necessary to ensure a stable energy flow free from possible devastating losses or instability. Secondly, hydropower is flexible and good for storage as a solution. We tell you that hydroelectric power is very flexible. Some hydropower facilities can quickly go from 0 to maximum output, as we told you earlier. So these can generate power to the grid immediately. This provides essential backup. The flexibility of hydropower means that it can be scaled to meet current energy demands. So we tell you that the storage capability means that when waters are high and currents are strong, that power can be saved to make sure that the production is always going to be good, is always going to be reliable in replacement of these irreversible types of dependency on other types of countries. The impact here is also very simple. More energy independence means that there's a shield from external shocks. That means that prices will not spike if there's a shock. That also means that people can always pay for energy and a better quality of life. Furthermore, greater security ensures the United States protection from other countries that it can be used as a source of leverage to the extent that it has in the status quo. Before I move on to our contention 3, I can take a POI if there is one. Contention 3 is the benefits to the economy. We tell you that this is going to result in huge benefits to employment and boost local economies. We tell you that hydropower employs 66,500 people in the US and it had not even met its heights yet. So we would maximize the number of people. We tell you that there are many jobs provided by building this type of hydroelectric power, manufacturing, utilities, professional and business services, construction, trade and transportation, energy systems, water management, environmental science, welding, machinery, and other sources. Obviously, expanding the source of energy is going to produce a lot of type of infrastructure that does employ thousands and thousands of people. The United States hydroelectric workforce could grow from 120,000 jobs by 2030 and 158,000 jobs by 2050. That would mean even higher with significant investments. By providing employment to many people, hydroelectric power helps boost the economy. Because these jobs are in primarily rural areas, provides high-paying jobs to people in those areas and historically boosted the economies of these struggling locations. So not only are you benefiting the economy of the United States writ large, but you're also providing jobs to those who are most vulnerable. That's to say, those who live in rural areas often suffer the most from unemployment, but providing this type of infrastructure would uniquely address such a problem in the long term because hydroelectric power is constantly expanding, it's constantly reliable. We would tell you that that's going to be a guarantee of economic opportunity for such vulnerable populations.
PY.
Debating this topic, I'll take your PY.
Okay, yeah. So if we have 80,000 dams currently in use that are not used for hydroelectric power, why do we have those dams? What is the purpose of those dams right now?
We would tell you that the purpose of those dams can also work in conjunction with producing hydroelectric power. Most of the reason why these dams are not producing hydroelectric power right now is because it takes a long time to conduct like licensing and stuff like that, but we would get rid of that with this resolution. While debating this topic, we must consider the human impact, which will be greatly aided by the building and maintenance of this new hydropower. That ensures more jobs to benefit societal welfare and better economies for struggling populations. This impact is large, considering that it already has empirical backing and will most definitely be a result of the plan. Look, the only reason why we haven't built these hydroelectric power infrastructures yet is because of a lack of inertia and realization that this type of licensing can just be overridden by the United States federal government taking a lead of the project. In the end, the only reason why we need to absolutely do this, or the many reasons why we need to absolutely do this, is to benefit local economies, provide jobs to those who are struggling, ensure that the United States has energy independence, and at all combat climate change. Thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm Zachary Hugh. I'm going to be talking for a while. Okay, so first of all, starting on the framework, we would agree with their weighing of cost benefit analysis. We agree with their definitions. Our counter plan is that we invest the same money from their plan into wind power, as wind is a newer tech, which means unlike hydroelectricity, it's getting better, but it's also currently comparably efficient. Estimates show that both are at like 35% of their full capacity. What we would say is that this is not harmable and this is mutually exclusive because A, we're using the same money. You can't use the same money for two different purposes. But B, it's more net beneficial to do our plan alone than the counter plan and the plan. So prefer our counter plan. So okay, first of all, first contention is the environment. So what we see is that hydropower is harvested through dams, which makes a reservoir, right? They let water through selectively at needed times. However, this requires two conditions: A, the blockage of natural water, and the disruption of ecosystems, right? This means that like the salmon that once went upstream to lay eggs now no longer have that ability. The birds that fished in the rivers, the deer that drank from it, the communities that drink from it, right? All of this gets destroyed, right? Since 1970, what we see is that freshwater species have lost 76% of their population in the US due to these dams, right? And that's I mean, my opponents would like to increase these dams by the thousands, right? My opponents would basically like to cause the extinction of these freshwater species, right?
Yeah.
That means the sure.
So if dams, how do we disrupt these communities?
Sorry, can you repeat it? You glitched out.
Yeah, I couldn't.
If we're retrofitting dams that exist already, how does this disrupt these communities?
Well, those dams are currently like blocking water, or they're not being used for hydroelectric power, which isn't disrupting the communities uniquely. Right. So this means that people who rely on those fish to eat survive and like make money, no longer have that source. This creates like mass extinction of animals, which we would tell you is bad because it's irreversible, and also because like life is good, but also like it just totally destroys these communities, as it means that people like don't have a food source, people lose their livelihoods, right? The impact is that the quality of life in these communities goes away, gets drastically worse. So contention 2 is that this is not sustainable. So what we see is that as climate change increases, reservoirs dry up. So subpoint A is where would we put these dams, right? So what we would see is that all the best dam spots in the US are already used, right? We have, as my opponents would tell you, we have 2,300 hydroelectric dams. I'm not sure if they said that statistic, but that's what it is, right? We have 2,300 currently. And there are, yes, over 80,000 dams, but like those dams have a purpose, right? There's a reason why those dams are not hydroelectric dams in the status quo. It's not just because, as my opponents would tell you, no one realized they could be used. It's because, you know, they have actually other purposes. It's for like storing fresh water. It's for like stopping floods from happening, right? These are dams that you can't just easily retrofit. No, these are dams that you can't just easily retrofit into hydroelectric dams. These are dams that like some cases you cannot like run water through because it's like, okay, the dam exists to stop the water from going in, right? So, and then in the US especially, what we would see is that the retrofitting of old dams to create these newer hydroelectric dams is uniquely like takes a while. It takes a long time, right? What we would say is that because all these dams, like so many of these dams are like incredibly old, right? So many of these dams are like over 100 years old. It takes years and years to plan. It takes years and years to like upgrade these dams to make them sufficient. And also like, you know, it requires a lot of space. It's just a lot of building time, right? What happens is that at some point B, they become outdated, right? Because they take so long to build, by the time they're built, they're often like irrelevant. What we see is that in a currently like super temperate climate, right? What happens is that they're based on climate data that's like over a decade old by that time, right? What happens is, and this is what we see with dams in Asia, or in South America, which is where all the dams are currently being built, all the new dam projects are currently happening because there's nowhere in the US that's good for these new dam projects, right? What we see is that they overestimate rainfall, but they underestimate potential damage from floods and erosion. And that's because all these dams are being built on like data that is years old in a climate that is rapidly changing, right? Subpoint C is about the volatility in weather. What we see is that dams are uniquely susceptible to droughts, which creates a barrier to producing energy, but also like droughts are uniquely getting way, way worse as climate change worsens. Additionally, so the energy is not constant, it's dependent on rainfall. Ultimately, it's not consistent. The reason why our opponents tell you they can so easily go from 0 to max capacity is because so often they are at 0 capacity. So contention 3 is time frame, right? So what we would say is that retrofitting old dams is actually comparable to building new dams, which takes on average like 9 years to do, because these dams are so old and because like none of the infrastructure is there, right? In order to retrofit a dam, you're basically rebuilding the dam because the dam is like old, because the dam obviously was never made to interact with this kind of infrastructure, with this like Sharia.
Why can't a dam control water flow and generate electricity at the same time?
Can't the dam control water flow and generate electricity? I mean, it can control water flow in that, yes, the water is flowing, but it can't like stop water flow and generate electricity at the same time, right? What we see is that you have to redirect water to build the turbines as well, right? You have to block off the water, right? What we see is that we need carbon emissions to be cut as soon as possible, which is why wind is the much better alternative. Is wind farms, even like the most large wind farms, take like 6 months to build, right? Waiting years and years for all these old dams to be retrofitted just to start creating energy is just 2 months. It is too much. Sorry, not 2 months. Contention 4 is cost effectiveness. What we see is that wind electricity is over twice as cost effective. That means for every dollar you put into wind energy, you get twice the kilowatt output than you do for hydro. This quite literally means with our counterplan, we're doubling the reduction in greenhouse gases, right? We went on this uniquely. So going on to their contention, they would tell you that dams provide healthy water flow. What we would tell you is no, they actually like destroy the environment, right? Dams have killed 75% of all freshwater species in the United States, right? On storage, and on sort of like augmenting other on sort of augmenting other sources of green energy. This is not unique because we still have hydropower in our status quo, right? In our counterplan, I mean, there are still 2,300 operating hydroelectric power dams in our counterplan. On energy independence, we solve for this and better, right? As I read you the statistic, right, they both have 35% energy efficiency currently, and wind power is getting better while hydroelectricity is not. So we solve for this and we do it better. We solve for energy independence. And then on contention 3, this happens either way. This happens either way because wind also happens in rural areas. Wind also employs like that tens of thousands of people, right? It's not unique. What we see is that also so specifically on their plan, it doesn't really work because what we would tell you is that most there's a reason why these dams are not hydroelectric, right? Most dams are for like water storage or like reservoirs for drinking water, right? You can't just like retrofit like huge water turbines into these dams and like make them for hydroelectric power because the point is they're for something else, right? There's 80,000 dams, only 2,300 of them are hydroelectric because you need a very specific type of environment to create a hydroelectric dam. That's why all the new hydroelectric projects are not in the US. And B, right, most of these hydroelectric dams have a mutually exclusive purpose that like you can't do while also creating hydroelectricity. So this plan like doesn't work. So anyway, vote for us.
All right. If everyone is ready, then the order will be op and then prop or gov. All right. I will begin time now. On my opponent's CP, first we're going to perm the CP. There's no reason why we can't invest money into wind power and hydroelectric power at the same time. My opponents say that we should significantly increase investment in wind power, but the fact of the matter is the US already significantly invested in wind power. So what does the significant increase look like that's different from the status quo? The thing that we really need to be increasing is hydroelectric power because we haven't seen that investment as of late, whereas wind power is already getting that investment. There's nothing really new coming from the CP that we don't already see in the status quo. So we do have the funds in their world as well. Something they tell you the reason that we cannot perm is because they're using the same money. Again, there's no reason why we can't use different money. Just saying that we're using the same money doesn't make any sense. This is not a reason to not perm. Further, they tell you that they have a competitive advantage, that wind is better overall if we just do wind because of the environmental impacts of water. But I'm going to tell you right now why energy-wise, it's going to be better to do both. Wind power typically only works at night when there's high winds and in places that have high winds. So it's actually really limited where they could build it. I mean, kind of like a lot of their refutes on hydropower, which is why a lot of countries use them as supplements, and especially the United States. But beyond that, because it only works at certain times, experts suggest that we have to use wind, solar, and hydro all in comparison or all at the same time because they all serve different purposes and work at different times and have different peaks of energy production. Now, let's go on to their first contention. They tell you that there's going to be a blockage of natural water and rerouting of water, which is going to lead to environmental impacts. First response is that they never quantify what the environmental impacts are going to be. Well, they tell you that fish are going to die in a lake in the past. They never tell you what the effects of dams have been in the future. The US has built 80,000 dams, and all of their impacts are just specific to building dams in the first place and rerouting water, which happens every single time you build a dam. If we've already built 80,000 dams in the past, why have these environmental impacts not been as detrimental as they point out? And why have they not led to these massive consequences? Furthermore, secondly, the actual plan that we propose solves for this problem because we're not creating any new blockages, which they said is the one that really creates long-term consequences. If they want to talk about rerouting, they really can't give any long-term harms of this. But beyond that, because dams typically work several times on a river, such as on the Colorado River, there's several dams down the river. If the first dam itself just stops the water, then the other dams can be built as we go in succession, meaning that we're not stopping all water or we're not, again, having to reroute it to an entirely new place because dams exist on multiple points of the river, which is something that, again, our study is suggesting when they say that 54,000 new dams can be built or can be not built, I mean, retrofitted with hydroelectric power. Now let's go to their second response. They tell you that reservoirs are drying up and that it's not sustainable for the long term. Their first warn on this is they kind of tell you this idea that in the status quo, there's not really a lot of new places to build dams. Remember, our plan already gets us out of any of this bind because we're not building in new places. We're building in places that already have an existing current and can be retrofitted. Something they tell you that they solve for this for is that, again, they're not going to be able to retrofit these dams because they serve other purposes. And this is kind of a response that they make across the flow. I'm going to make a couple of responses here. First of all, this is evidence is literally from the Department of Energy that says that these 54,000 dams of the 80,000 dams that exist that are not retrofitted with energy can be retrofitted with energy because, again, they're not too old and also they're not solely for the purpose of stopping water. The majority of dams are for controlling water, for letting water in and out. But if they haven't been retrofitted with hydroelectric power, then they're not getting the energy that can be produced from that dam. In the status quo, we only have about 3,000 dams, or 3% of the 80,000 that exist that are actually retrofitted with hydroelectric power. If my opponent wants to talk about how much energy we can create, if we boost that to 54,000 more, we're going to be creating so much more energy that their wind power is not going to be able to catch up, or it's not going to be able to keep on pace, because that's a ton more energy. But furthermore, on this idea that, again, the dams are not going to be able to be built, again, we can stop the dams earlier and rebuild those dams as we're going forward, which also has to do with their third contention, where they tell you this idea of retrofitting old dams is the same as building new dams. Again, it's not the same because we can stop the water earlier because they exist on multiple points of a river. But beyond that, one of the things they tell you as well is kind of a logical fallacy. Throughout the flow and in response to our counterplan, they give you this idea that why haven't they been retrofitted with hydroelectric power at the beginning? Why did this not exist? Remember what my partner Cami told you in her last speech, and I'm going to go kind of more in depth into this, is this idea of licensing and why haven't they built it? In fact, it costs tens of millions of dollars and years of effort to go through the licensing process. And for some of these facilities, particularly some of the smaller facilities, they just don't have that money or that time. And this is actually from the Hydropower Association. He estimates that there are dozens of different agencies involved in licensing or relicensing a single hydropower facility. This process, he said, takes longer than licensing a nuclear plant. The reason that we haven't built them fast enough is because the licensing process takes too long. But if the federal government is going to take charge of this, as Cami pointed out, and invest massive amounts of money into this, we're going to be able to get these hydropower dams built. So my opponent's argument that because it doesn't exist now, that's a reason that, again, you should vote against us because it wasn't built for a reason, is just an implication that's not actually analyzing the situational factors that led to the status quo. Now let's go to their fourth contention. They tell you this idea of cost effectiveness, that hydropower is not going to be able to pay for itself. But that's just patently false. In about a decade or so, hydropower dams actually do pay for themselves. So we're already getting that money back on what we're investing into it. But beyond that, if we're benefiting local economies, we actually have a human impact on what we're talking about. Wind power does not require as much workers as hydropower dams, and therefore does not actually create as many jobs. So in the long run, if we're benefiting local economies, and especially these vulnerable rural communities, if we're going to look at cost effectiveness, which we really shouldn't be, because what is the government's money compared to actually benefiting rural communities that need this money and would improve their quality of life? Now, let's go onto our counterplan. They tell you that there's a reason we can't do this, or that they're not retrofitted now for a reason. Again, this is just a logical fallacy. They're saying it's not now, so it shouldn't be. But secondly, again, licensing is the problem here, and that's why they haven't been done yet. So we can extend our counterplan and tell you that, again, these 54,000 dams can be retrofitted with hydroelectric power. That's up from 3,000 in the status quo. So even if my opponents want to say, oh, that's going to take like a pretty long time, the fact of the matter is wind power is also going to take time to build, and they're not building 54,000 wind power plants, whereas we're going to be retrofitting 54,000 dams, which gives us bigger impact and outweighs on magnitude on our first contention if they want to talk about energy, because 54,000 dams is up from 3,000 in the status quo. And considering how much hydro already creates now in energy, we're going to be boosting that by so much energy, which is going to provide the biggest contributions to climate change. And further, if my opponents want to say that investing some more money in wind power is also going to be beneficial, then sure, invest in it as a supplement to hydropower, and that gives us the best chance of actually solving climate change. So we have the competitive advantage, even if you want to look at the perm. Now, on our second contention of energy independence, there really just isn't a lot here. When we look at security, we have to have as much energy produced in the United States as possible. So not relying on foreign powers is most important. And because we're going to be boosting energy the most through the perm, and also just through the plan itself, again, we have the most energy independence, which means the most security of our power system, which gives us links into saying we have flexibility in storage that also is specifically from hydropower. But again, also that energy independence, that our power system is secure, and that people are going to have a better quality of life because there's not going to be fluctuating prices in the power grid, especially because if we only do wind power, it's not going to work at certain times, which is going to make energy more expensive. So having all of those supplements is best if we want to keep prices constant. Now, on our third contention of the economy, there's basically nothing here. Extended economy is going to be helped because hydropower creates the most amount of jobs. If we invest in hydro and wind, we're creating even more jobs. Remember, those 54,000 new hydroelectric dams that we're going to be retrofitting are going to be creating the most jobs and benefiting the most local economies. That's the most probable impact in the round on either side. And beyond that, again, we are also probably going to produce more energy, as 54,000 dams is a huge increase from the 3,000 we had before. So on all metrics, we outweigh. For all these reasons, so proud to propose.
Okay. Hello, my name's Luca. I use he, him pronouns. Today I'll be the second speaker for the opposition. There's a lot of moving parts of this debate, so I think a quick off-time roadmap would be necessary. I'm going to be starting with just some general refutations of the plan, just telling you why the plan fails. Then I'll go into the perm, then our case, then gov case. Okay. Is everyone ready? All right. With that, I would like to start my time. Now, starting off on the plan, this is 100% an inviable plan. First off, my opponents tell you that there are some 54,000 dams that could be retrofitted with hydropower. First off, we tell you that you can't cite sources in an NPDL tournament, and they explicitly cite the EPA, so you should drop the statistic and count it as an unwarranted claim. Second, we tell you that there is a reason why these dams are not retrofitted with hydroelectric power. Think about what dams are used for. They're used for three things. One, hydroelectric power, right? That's the 23,000. Two, it's for blocking water and rediverting water supply, right? You can't block water and let water through turbines and harvest electricity off of it at the same time, right? You can't store water and generate water at the same time. This doesn't make sense. For the redirection of water, it's like, you're redirecting water, you're limiting water supply, you're only letting a small trickle through. So this would be entirely inefficient plan by the gov case because they are making it so that you're only getting this like small trickle of water generating, like a few kilowatt hours of electricity when you have to go through this massive infrastructure project. The third reason dams are used is for the storage of drinking water and agricultural water, right? This is to feed our plants, right? Feed our crops, to put glasses of water into citizens' hands, right? And you can't let hydroelectric power through those types of dams because it is exactly for that reason. It is to drink. You can't let water run through and evaporate into the atmosphere and go through our natural currents, as well as store it for water at the same time. Our opponents never respond to this. They just rely on your 54,000 statistic that does not make sense at all, because the reason why they're not retrofitted with hydroelectric power. Yes, the POI.
Can you please really concisely explain why this is mutually exclusive?
Why the two are mutually exclusive? Yeah, because you can't store water and let water through for hydroelectric for turbines at the same time, and you also can't redivert small trickles of water to prevent towns from flooding while also letting large amounts of water through to produce electricity, right? It simply doesn't make sense. We bring this up in our first speech and you guys do not respond to it at all. Second, this is still a highly expensive plan and is insanely time consuming plan, because in order to retrofit these old dams that were built in the 1970s with turbines, what you still need to do is you still need to redirect the water, right? You still need to build a temporary dam, which is the largest part of a dam building process, in order to get this dam, this big wall, and to put turbines to generate electricity on it. You need to have the water away from it so you can actually do construction type stuff, right? This is the longest part of the dam making process, and we tell you this from the first speech. This is extremely expensive, it's extremely cost ineffective, and you're weighing this on a cost benefit analysis. The most cost benefit is to invest in wind instead of doing this insanely money consuming and time consuming projects of hydroelectric power. Turbines are huge, right? There's a reason why you can't just easily strap on a turbine onto an old dam, because you completely need to rebuild the infrastructure of this dam to support these large turbines. It's to support large amounts of water going through. So either way, this plan fails, and this plan does not solve for their big issues they tell you. Now, on the perm, our opponents tell you to perm this. First off, we tell you it is the same money. You can't have the same money going into two different places. Our opponents tell you that we don't give you a reason why we can't use different money. Given that it's our opponent's plan is an undisclosed, quote unquote, significant amount of money, you can't just double money out of nowhere. Congress does not have infinite money to spend on infinite projects. Also, additionally, it doesn't have the political capital to be spending billions and billions of dollars onto two different climate things, because quite frankly, just one climate thing is the most Congress will ever pass, right? And also our opponents talk about how our second reason for why the perm fails is because it's bad to do both. Our opponents tell you it solves for the energy shortage even more, but first off, reference their case, Judge. Reference their case, which tells you that they're pretty much solving for all the impacts of climate change. Why do you want to solve for all the impacts of climate change twice? Why do you want to severely mitigate climate change twice, right? The fact is, they are telling you these wide-scale impacts where we are replacing the non-renewable energy game. So why would we want to do this twice? It is cost ineffective. That is the second reason why the counterplan still stands, because it is best to only do one instead of just like doubling up on the same problem for no reason at all. And the counterplan is significantly better than the plan. And this is what I'm going to get into now. Now, on our first contention of environment, our opponents tell you that these dams are already built and we don't tell you the future impacts. We tell you that 76% of populations have already been destroyed. Building either future dams or just like, changing how dams work would completely remake like ecosystems and would completely destroy like future populations and destroy the water currents that populations rely on. Our opponents talk about how you could also like have like multiple dams in succession. If you have multiple dams in succession, you're still changing the water flow in some way, right? You're still slowing down the water with each dam, or you're still like changing the way the dam naturally flows. Also, like salmon can't just like get through a dam, right? You destroy like these freshwater populations that rely on the free flowing currents of these waters. Second, on our second contention of unsustainability, I want to talk about how they cite the statistic from the Department of Energy. Again, you can't cite sources and you can't get energy out of like a trickle of water that is used for redirection, right? You need to have like large amounts of currents flowing through, which is not the purpose of the current dams that exist that are not used for hydroelectric power, right? This simply does not work or would completely change the ecosystems and would still have the same impacts. Our opponents talk about how our opponents bring up this licensing issue. They tell you themselves that costs tens of millions of dollars to achieve licensing, tens of millions of dollars just to retrofit each one of these hydroelectric dams. To retrofit each of these dams with hydroelectric power. That is insanely cost ineffective, right? They tell you themselves it costs $10 million per license. Meanwhile, it costs none of that for wind energy. Wind energy, we tell you, is twice as cost effective as hydroelectric power, right? You have to go through this long licensing process, and that's not even to build the actual dam. That's simply just to obtain the license. I want to talk about how they pay for themselves. So does wind. Wind pays for itself, but in a shorter time frame because it's significantly cheaper. I want to talk about how they benefit the local economy more because like you create more jobs. The fact is we're spending the same amount of money in the plan versus counterplan, but we're creating like the same amount of jobs because it's the same amount of money, but we're creating more energy because it's more cost effective to build solar panels than it is to completely like change the infrastructure of our dams. On our third contention of time frame, our opponents talk about how they just repeat what they said before. Cross apply what I've already said. Wind power is extremely much faster to make, and they don't respond to our fourth contention of cost effectiveness. Now, on their case, their first contention was about combating climate change. Again, we solve for this, but in a much better fashion. We're using the same exact amount of money, but because wind power is significantly cheaper, we are combating more and more climate change. We're mitigating the impacts of climate change nearly twice as much because wind power is so much more cost effective than hydroelectric electricity is. Also, on environment, we are doing better for the environment, turn the environment point, because we are not disrupting ecosystems. We are not disrupting the free flow of water. On the second contention of U.S. energy independence, we tell you that it is volatile. Hydroelectric electricity is extremely volatile, is susceptible to weather patterns, right? US cannot gain full energy independence and full energy autonomy when you have huge fluxes in how much energy we are producing out of these hydroelectric powers. I want to talk about how you have as much energy as possible. That's simply not true. Okay. And on the third contention of economy, again, cross supply, we already said we have the same amount of jobs, but these jobs are actually needed to actually go to producing like actual, like good, efficient amounts of kilowatt electricity instead of producing needless jobs to have inefficient ways of harvesting electricity. They're wasting tens of millions per project on licensing fees, so that doesn't create any jobs additionally. We create, in fact, more jobs because we're not spending tens of millions of dollars on licensing fees. So, Judge, for all of these reasons, it's quite clear hydroelectricity is extremely inefficient. Their plan fails because it doesn't even work, and wind energy is so much better for economies, for the environment, and for climate change. For all these reasons, I just strong vote for the opposition. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to start on the perm, right? So first of all, we tell you that it's the same money, right? You can't spend the same money twice, right? So therefore, these are mutually exclusive. And they would tell you, oh, we could just get like more money, right? But like, think about how real policymaking works, right? When legislators are trying to decide, oh, should we invest in this? Should we invest in that? They don't just go, I know, we'll find double the money and we'll invest in them both, right? No, they have to actually make it they have to actually make a choice. They have to actually have a debate, right? Like, and also like, given that they never even tell you how much money either side is investing, they're just like, oh, it's a significant investment, right? We don't like this is like literally like could be like hundreds of billions of dollars. Probably is, given that they're saying they're going to build retrofit 54,000 dams, which for the licensing alone costs 10 million per project, right? It's going to be billions and billions of dollars that we can't just get out of thin air, right? We don't have the political capital. We don't have, like, it's just not realistic. It's just not a valid perm, right? Also, anyway, it's better to just do our plan than to do theirs. So whatever. So the first motor issue is going to be the environment, right? What we would tell you is that these dams and hydropower specifically like destroys these environments, right? First of all, like these dams already have uses, right? If you're using the dam to like regulate water and basically let water in small trickles, like a couple of times a month, right? You're not providing you're not actually creating any energy from that, right? Like you're creating small trickles of like, oh, okay, maybe you get like a couple watts of energy, right? So either you're like destroying the original purpose through which this dam was created, in which case you're probably like flooding the town which relies on it, or you're just like wasting a bunch of money and you're not creating any energy, right? There's a reason why these dams exist, right? And you can't do both, right? What we would also tell you is that these dams have uniquely like destroyed 75% of all the freshwater species in America, right? By retrofitting them and by creating so much more like water flow and so much more water inefficiency, what we see is that there's just a total loss of biodiversity in these areas, which is unique impact on our side of the flow, as we're not killing a bunch of salmon, right? What we see is that people lose their food source because of this, and people like literally like lose their livelihood because they can't sell food, they can't like feed themselves, right? And what we also see is that life is inherently good and they're killing a bunch of things, right? And they're causing species to go extinct, right? So, and then the second contention is energy and sustainability, right? So they concede, I tell you this at the top of my first speech and they don't interact with it. They concede that they have the same energy efficiency, right? But we're just creating more energy in our current plan because as I'm about to tell you, right, we have more cost effectiveness. They also concede that wind power is literally twice as cost effective as hydroelectric. But also what we see is that like wind is significantly more sustainable because these reservoirs are drying up, right? These reservoirs are drying up, but also that, we're not paying like tens of millions of dollars of licensing just to get these projects started, right? We're not wasting all this money. So what we see is that we're actually creating more power. We're creating more wind power. We're solving for climate change better than they can, right? And then voter issue 3 is cost effectiveness, right? They just don't respond to this. They don't respond to the fact that wind is literally twice as cost effective as hydroelectric, right? Even though they have the same amount of energy efficiency, right? You're literally getting twice the bang for your buck on our counterplan than on their counterplan because we're generating twice the amount of energy because we have twice the amount of cost effectiveness. And that's not even bringing into account the $10 million licensing and the years of licensing that happens uniquely on their side of the plan, right? So on weigh our climate change impacts about impacting climate change over theirs, right? Because they can see that they have the same amount of efficiency, right? We aren't wasting tens of billions on licensing for each project. We're more cost effective, right? We're solving for this better, but also outweigh this on magnitude, right? We're just simply eliminating climate change more than they are, but also outweigh this on time frame because what we would see is that they specifically tell you, and they also don't interact with the fact that retrofitting a dam takes years and years and years to do, and also the licensing takes years, but creating a wind farm takes like 6 months, right? And also weigh our economic impacts over their economic impacts because we create more jobs because once again, we're not spending tens of millions of dollars per project on licensing. We're just creating more jobs in more places in America. So for all these reasons, because OP is a better policy, vote for OP.
Okay. United States federal government should substantially increase its investment. To begin on framing, what either side in this debate looks like was very clear from the top. We told you that the perm very clearly works. We can just use different money to fund this type of policy. We tell you that there's no reason why the United States cannot just draw more money from its huge budget, or even just pass the two policies as one climate bill. If they want to say like Congress isn't going to pass like two types of climate bills, we very easily win on the perm at the top. It is literally not competitive. But also, we tell you that there's nothing new coming from the counter plan that we don't see in the status quo, because there's already huge amounts of investment in wind power. Why do we need more? We're lacking investment in hydroelectric power. We gave you that uniqueness at the top. They never addressed it. We told you that the specific gaps in our energy that the United States is experiencing is because we don't have hydroelectric power. They never address that. I also want to really quickly reread our plan. We told you that the US federal government would increase investment by retrofitting built dams with hydropower capabilities within our plan. That means that all of their examples of just like changing the course of water doesn't make much sense, because we told you out of the 80,000, 54,000 could be retrofitted appropriately. If you want to drop the warrant because we read a tag or whatever, then you can take this. You can intuitively let water pass through and store water at the same time. Storing water and creating energy can happen at the same time. Anytime water is let through, we create energy. Even dams for reservoirs in status quo can have hydroelectric power because they can let water in and out, which is all they need. Not all dams are small trickles, but for trickles, this requires micro hydroelectric technology, which is built and still produces energy that contribute to fighting climate change. So if you want to take their like weird trickle analysis, we tell you that they can still create micro energy to the same capacity. So even if it's created like within trickles, it still creates the same amount of energy. We tell you that technology already exists. We tell you that then we create the unique energy that is needed to fill the United States' current energy gap. What did this mean for cost efficiency? Let's look over the fourth contention of cost effectiveness and our third contention of generating money for the economy. We tell you that water power pays for itself. They don't address this. They also don't respond to Sebastian's impact analysis. They even at the very top, what is the government's money to the well-being of communities? Even if water hydroelectric power didn't pay for itself, but they don't provide any analysis for, because we also tell you that their warrants are not really contextualized, given that all their data is from like building new dams and not retrofitting old dams. What does that compare to generating jobs for those who live in rural communities? We would point you to the fact that the existence of wind power infrastructure is very sporadic because it depends on where the wind is going to be strong. But in terms of rural dams, it's most often in rural communities where they need those jobs the most. But we also tell you that it takes more jobs to create hydroelectric power infrastructure. They didn't respond to that either. So we have this turn. You only have these jobs generated in rural areas at the point in which you're building dams, not just sporadic areas in which there might be more wind, so we're going to be building wind infrastructure. We would also point to you to how this power is going to be a lot more affordable because we're retrofitting already existing infrastructure. They don't address that warrant at all. On to our contention one of combating climate change. We told you that we're investing in hydroelectric power, which plays a crucial role in our fight against climate change. We tell you that hydroelectric power is renewable and clean. It complements other energy sources. It's incredibly flexible. They don't respond to how hydroelectric power fills the gaps the wind and solar leave. So you're going to vote on that, if not anything else. It's literally going to be uniquely combating climate change in areas that wind doesn't cover, because we don't see any response on Sebastian's point that wind literally only works where wind is strong and wind is constant. That's very unreliable. That reliability is provided by hydroelectric dams. They say that there's huge fluctuations in our world. We would tell you that it's the exact opposite. We address their contention too on reliability then. The majority of dams are for controlling water. When we retrofit existing dams, we can take advantage of that. We produce a lot more energy because we're using more money cost efficiently because we're using existing infrastructure, but we're also creating it in a way that's more reliable, doesn't exist, and where the wind is weak and where the wind is strong, and we are like filling already existing gaps. On their contention of disrupting local ecosystems, they never quantify what the impact of losing salmon is going to be against creating millions of jobs and ensuring that we're combating climate change. Short term, it may seem a little harmful at the very highest ground, but we provide more reliable energy to address climate change. Is long term a lot more important, even if there's a marginal alteration of ecosystems. But even so, though, we tell you that this is not going to happen because we're building dams in succession and we're using infrastructure that already exists. So we're not altering these rivers in a meaningful way. In terms of time frame, we tell you on their contention 3, the infrastructure was always there and may cost tens of millions of dollars to go through the licensing process for dams in the status quo, but it won't be once the United States literally licenses themselves as a federal government. They don't address that warrant. We get rid of the uniqueness point there.
This point about how this 10 million licensing fee will suddenly go away once the United States federal government steps in was not brought up in your previous two constructives, and should be disregarded from the flow.
Okay, I stopped time. In my constructive, I said the United States would override such a process. And Sebastian says that when we head this, we're going to get rid of the licensing fees. Okay, even if you drop that licensing point, it's going to be a lot cheaper, and you're going to get rid of that uniqueness because the United States has incentive to decrease the cost. So in the end, we're increasing the energy independence and the economy of these countries because we tell you from the very top, and it's really just woefully unengaged with, the point at which you're creating more important energy and the point at which you're filling the gaps that they didn't respond to. We're very clearly winning on climate change, if at all, energy independence. Thank you.
All right, so we've restarted the recording. Go ahead, Judge Burke.
I was just saying thank you for a really interesting and really good debate. It turned out to be a 2-0 vote in favor of Gov. I don't know if you want to start. I'm happy to start, whatever you.
You can go ahead and start.
Okay. So for me, let me just start with kind of the sort of overarching sort of clash, which is, can we do both, or is it one or the other? I mean, I really didn't really want to rule on whether that was going to be the difference or not. So I did table it, although I have to say, after passing a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill, made me think that maybe we could do both, but whatever. No one mentioned it, and I kind of wanted to table it for later to see if there was another way to decide the round other than that one. So let's start with the Gov case. I thought the retrofitting was really good framing for Gov, because Op is right that dams cause a lot of ecological damage. But government's correct is for those particular dams that they're asking to retrofit, all the ecological damage is done already. And so all of those kind of arguments around salmon and 75% of them are died, they're already dead, you know? And why is it going to be 100 if it's the same dams that's, you know, already being blocked? Why is it any more? And I never really got good arguments from, I'm not sure there is any, quite frankly. So all of those arguments kind of fall flat. I mean, personally, my view was that Op probably should have gone a little bit all in and said, these things are so bad that we should rip them down. And in fact, some of the dams are being ripped down already versus kind of the benefits of hydro. But anyway, you guys didn't make that argument. I'm just saying that was a possible kind of way to argue the round, to maybe get access to those impacts if you wanted those access to those impacts. The second thing that I think that was sort of on the Gov side was that Gov argued that, and I think Gov could have argued this a little bit better, quite frankly, but they did make enough of the points that I kind of gave it to them. And this is around the flexibility point, okay? So when you have a dam, you actually have water in storage behind the dam, and you can choose when to produce electricity by releasing water through the whatever generator or whatever it is. And I think the point that Gov does make, but I think could have been made clearer, was that, you know, with wind, you can't choose when to actually produce it. It's whenever this thing's there, and whenever the wind comes, it's when it produces electricity. And with water, you can actually choose it. And I think, you know, what Gov was trying to say, I believe, when they said that it's a complement, is that, hey, whenever wind is down, then you can actually use the sort of, you know, the storage of potential energy or whatever, I don't know, physics you want to use, whatever term you want to use. And I think they made enough of that point to sort of give them the point. And then the last one on the economy, and I can talk about climate change a little bit later, but on the economy, I mean, I don't honestly know which makes more jobs or not. I mean, both sides said it's the same number of jobs. Well, one side said the same number of jobs, the other side said more jobs for hydro. I have no idea how to really think about that. I think one of the things that Gov probably could have said was that, okay, but if we put it in wind, it's in the same locations, and it's in a, you know, hydro is necessarily in a different location from wind. So at least we spread out jobs across the country, which you probably could have used that argument. And I think that would have been more helpful to kind of pull in those impacts there. On the op side, I guess we already talked about the environment. let's see, what did I write here? Oh, you guys talk about like, and I think actually Gov wins this point. You guys talk about like stopping the river. Like the point of these dams is not to like stop the river and make it dry and then kind of put the river through and make it wet again. The point is to have a consistent flow of a river so you don't have flooding and all that other kind of stuff. And so this idea that like I didn't really understand the idea that all of a sudden you're going to have to turn it off and on, and it's a sort of it's not kind of the way rivers work. I think, quite frankly, Gov could have made more of an argument here about how this doesn't really make sense. I didn't really understand how it made sense, but I think that Gov could have done a better job there. I think where Op is really on the best ground is on cost benefit. On the POO, Gov did mention it in both the first speech and the second speech. So I sort of gave that one to Gov. It's still expensive. Gov says that it pays for itself. I think, you could have been on a little stronger ground by saying, you said that the efficiency is the same at 35%. So I didn't understand how you get twice the output and why it's better if it's the same efficiency. So, that was kind of, I needed a little more fleshing out as to why it was sort of super better. And so I didn't leave, and it could be, I don't know, actually, to be honest with you, I have no idea. But I think that if you kind of centered your arguments around that and kind of flushed out that could have been a way to get an op ballot. But as it was, I didn't really see any offense left for op, and so I gave it to Gov. Sorry for the long RFD.
Okay. Well, I think Judge Berg did a fantastic job going through the line by line and the substantive argumentation. I pretty much agree with everything he had to say, so I won't try to add more to that aspect of the decision. I'll take a little bit of a different tack and talk about the overall strategic setup of this round. And I think my comment for both teams is that although I think that y'all are doing a great job on the line by line arguments, I think that you are undervaluing how important it is to have the broader strategic vision of the round so that once you've won particular arguments, you can then leverage them to win the ballot. Specifically, I think that both sides are underestimating how important the counter plan competition debate is, at least to my ballot. I end up voting for the government primarily on the permutation. Specifically, I think that the opposition says that this counterplan is competitive because it's impossible to use the same money twice. That's just not a good argument. And I think that the government handles it effectively by saying that there's no particular reason why it has to be the exact same like dollar bills. If the government is able to pay a certain amount, there's no reason why the government can't pay 2 times that amount. I agree with Judge Berg that, in a world where we're passing $1 trillion spending bills, I'm sure that we can spend money on 2 energy projects. You don't run a spending dis-ad. You don't say spending money is bad and will like bankrupt the country. You talk about cost effectiveness, but that's different from a spending dis-ad. So there's no reason why I wouldn't want to spend 2 times the money. You say that spending 2 times the money would cost political capital. That's an argument that only comes out in the second opposition speech. If you wanted to go for that, you should have put it in the first speech, because once you put something in the second speech, you make it very easy for the government to beat it because they have the last word. They say, well, what if we just put it in the same bill? I don't know if that's a great response, but given that they do have the last word because you brought the argument too late in the round, I can just give that to them. And then you say, why solve climate change twice? But they tell me that these 2 energy sources are complementary with one another. And at that point, you basically lose access to any unique benefits of wind power because the government is also doing those things. At that point, it becomes very difficult for you to win the round, although not impossible, and I'll get to that in a second. But the couple points that I would like to make for the government here is that in the same way that plans should have a text, and ideally a text that you would drop in the chat while you read it, and in the same way that counter plans should have a text, also ideally one that would be dropped in the chat, but neither team did that. It is just as important for permutations to have a text, right? Because if permutation is although it's not an advocacy, it is something that you're saying could be done. And if you're very particular with your permutation text, that makes it significantly easier for you to win the competition debate, because if in your permutation text you specify that you're spending 2 times the money and you specify that you're using different money, then it becomes very explicit from your wording that this thing is actually permeable. The second, so that would be my comment for the member government speaker. My comment for the leader of government, the prime minister, is that I think that you're correct in spending a little bit of time at the start of the rebuttal going through the perm responses, but I think your time allocation is misplaced in that you kind of blip through these responses really quickly and move on. And you're lucky that I gave you a lot of leeway there, because I didn't think the opposition arguments originally on the competition were that good. But I think you need to slow down a little bit, explain those responses, and then most importantly, what I'm telling you right now, right? Like once we win the perm, then this is how this impacts the rest of the round. This is how this undercuts the rest of their offense. Vote here. This is a game over for them. Like once you've won that argument, you need to stop and spend 20, 30 seconds jumping on that and saying like, judge, sign the ballot now. This round is over. We won, they lost. And instead you kind of do that as a 20-second throwaway and move on. I don't think that was the right strategic decision, at least for my ballot. Now, to the opposition, I did mention that even once you lose the perm, you still could win the round in theory, because you also say on your counterclaim competition that in addition to being mutually exclusive, which it's clearly not, this counterclaim is also competitive in net benefits. And okay, maybe it is, right? If you have certain disadvantages to the plan, and those disadvantages would therefore also tie to the perm, then maybe you could win. And the key thing that you need to do, if that is your approach to the round, is think about which part of your offense is unique and can function even after your counterclaim gets permed, which part of your offense is unique to your world, and label it not so much as a contention, because I don't really know what a contention is, but rather as a disadvantage. And some of your offense, for instance, biodiversity, salmon dying, things like that, right? That offense still stands even after they win the perm debate, because even in the world of the perm, they do kill a bunch of wildlife species, whereas if we just do wind energy without hydropower, then you don't kill those wildlife species. So that could be a reason to prefer your counterplan on its own over the perm. So that portion of your offense is unique to you, whereas other portions of the offense, like jobs, for instance, are something that they get to perm along with perming your counterplan, which means that you then need to spend time, first of all, labeling that offense as unique and saying, judge, even if we lose the perm, we still win because of this, right? The even if phrasing is always very good to winning ballots, because it means that you don't have to win every argument. You say, well, first of all, we win this, but even if we don't win this, you still vote for us because of this other thing. And then once you've done the even if layering, you need to weigh. Nobody in this round is weighing anything. I have this impact coming out about biodiversity, and their responses to it, like they're trying, the government is trying to mitigate it. They're saying, no, we're not reducing biodiversity. The opposition is saying, yes, you are reducing biodiversity. Where do we put the dams? Do we put the multiple dams on the same river? Like really fantastic line by line argumentation that I won't get to because I think Judge Berg did a much better job covering it. But big picture, let's say you win biodiversity. Let's say the opposition wins biodiversity. Just let's pretend like they do. And let's pretend like the government wins climate change because they've won the perm debate. Okay, but which one has the bigger impact? Nobody tells me that. Whichever side had spent 30 seconds in the rebuttal being like, we win this impact, or at least a risk of offense on this impact, and also this impact is the biggest, I'd be like, great, I can vote for that team now because they've weighed and the other side didn't. But neither side does that. So then I'm left trying to do the weighing for you, which is never a safe bet for you as a debater, hoping that the judge does the weighing for you and it comes out on your side. I guess I end up voting for climate change over biodiversity because the impacts of climate change are something that the opposition never really contests. Like the opposition doesn't say climate change is not a major impact. So those impacts flow through without any particular defense on them. Whereas the impacts of biodiversity are sufficiently mitigated. I still think the op has a risk of offense on them. But the government says things like, well, you're saying that the 76% of species, but those were the ones that died in the past. You're not talking about the future. And also, well, maybe we're putting some dams upstream and there are multiple dams in the same river. Like there are a bunch of mitigatory arguments that make me want to vote for that impact less than for the climate change impact. And once the gov wins the perm, they get very clean access to climate change, which means they win the round. Do any of the debaters have any questions for either me or for Judge Berg?
Yeah, I actually have a question. So thank you for the RFD. I just going into rebuttal, do you think there's any way to win on biodiversity? Because I don't know. It seems pretty mitigated to me.
It's an uphill battle, but in a world where your opponent in her rebuttal did no weighing, if you had done 15 seconds of weighing, I would be like, hey, you got lucky and now you won. I'm not saying it's the greatest argument to go for. I'm saying, like, what else do you have?
For me, I would have said no, because I felt like you didn't have access to those impacts at all. I thought government had sort of offset that. I thought, honestly, your best bet was to kind of focus on the cost benefit issue, which is what Gov tells me that they want to weigh on in the first place, and try to weigh on that and tell me why the cost benefit of eliminating hydro completely and doing all wind is better. That's where I thought you were on the best ground. That was just how I looked at the round.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well, seeing how there are no further questions that I can. Oh,
I'm sorry. Can we get the recording of the round?
Well, the recording of the round is going to be posted on the NPDL YouTube channel, okay. NPDL recordings, where you will be able to view it and show it to your family.
Okay.
All right, great work, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.